as well as a sizable loan, $16,000 per mile of track on flat prairie land, $32,000 for hilly terrain, and $48,000 in the mountains. As was the case with Jay Cooke's Northern Pacific, these railroads tried to build as quickly and as cheaply as possible in order to take advantage of the governmental largesse. Where James J. Hill would be obsessed with finding the shortest route for his railroad, the government-subsidized companies, knowing that they were paid by the mile, quote, sometimes built winding, circuitous roads to collect for more mileage, as Burton Folsom recounts. Union Pacific Vice President and General Manager Thomas Durant, quote, stressed speed, not workmanship, writes Folsom, which meant that he and his chief engineer, former Union Army General Grenville Dodge, often used whatever kind of wood was available for railroad ties, including fragile cottonwood. This, of course, is in stark contrast to James J. Hill's insistence on only using the best quality materials, even if they were more expensive. Durant paid so many lumberjacks to cut trees down for rails that farmers were forced to use rifles to defend their land from the subsidized railroad builders. Not for him was the Hill motto, we've got to prosper with you or be poor with you. Folsom continues, since Dodge was in a hurry, he laid track on the ice and snow. Naturally, the line had to be rebuilt later in the spring. What was worse, unanticipated spring flooding along the lower fork of the Platte River washed out the rails, bridges, telephone poles, doing at least $50,000 of damage in the first year. No wonder some observers estimated the actual building cost at almost 3 times what it should have been. In 1869, after 7 years of construction, the two subsidized railroads managed to meet up at Promontory Point, Utah, amidst much hoopla and celebration. What is not mentioned, however, is that after the big celebration, both of the lines had to be rebuilt and even relocated in places, a task that took 5 more years into 1874. The wasteful costs of construction were astonishing. The subsidized railroads routinely used more gunpowder blasting their way through mountains and forests on a single day than was used during the entire Battle of Gettysburg. With so much tax money floating around, the executives of the Central Pacific and Union Pacific stole funds from their own companies in order to profit personally, something that would have been irrational for James J. Hill or any other private market entrepreneur to do. For example, the Union Pacific managers created their own coal company, mining coal for $2 per ton and selling it to themselves for $6 per ton, pocketing the profits. This crooked scam was repeated in dozens of instances and would have been exposed and would be exposed as the Credit Mobilier scandal. Credit Mobilier was the name of the companies run by the Union Pacific executives. With virtually everything riding on political connections as opposed to creating the best quality railroad for consumers, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific executives naturally spent an inordinate amount of time on politics as opposed to business management. While James J. Hill detested politicians and politics and paid very little attention to them, things were very different with the Union Pacific. Folsom explains. In 1866, Thomas Durant wined and dined prominent citizens, including senators, an ambassador, and government bureaucrats, along a completed section of the railroad. He hired an orchestra, a caterer, 6 cooks, a magician to pull subsidies out of a hat, and a photographer. For those with ecumenical palates, he served Chinese duck and Roman goose. The more adventurous were offered roast ox and antelope. All could have expensive wine and, for dessert, strawberries, peaches, and cherries. After dinner, some of the men hunted buffaloes from their coaches. Durant hoped that all would go back to Washington inclined to repay the Union Pacific for its hospitality. In addition, free railroad passes and Credit Mobilier stock were routinely handed out to members of Congress and state legislators, and General William Tecumseh Sherman was sold land near Omaha, Nebraska, for $2.50 an acre when the going rate was $8. Congress responded to the 1874 Credit Mobilier scandal by enacting a blizzard of regulations on the Union Pacific and Central Pacific that would in the future make it impossible for them to operate with any semblance of efficiency. Because of the regulations, managers could not make quick decisions regarding leasing, borrowing money, building extensions of the rail lines, or any other day-to-day business decision. Each such decision literally required an act of Congress. Political interference also meant that separate lines were required to be built to serve communities represented by influential members of Congress, even if those lines were uneconomical. No business could possibly survive and earn a profit under such a scenario. The Union Pacific went bankrupt in 1893. The Great Northern, on the other hand, was still going strong. Not having accepted any government subsidies, James J. Hill was free to build and operate his railroad